some progress reports on how we've been serving and collaborating with rural schools and teachers and districts and states, particularly around education. And I don't offer any of this as a menu of things for you to choose from, as much as things to inspire the ways that you might consider inviting us to be a part of collaborations to serve your own students and your own communities. So I'm going to maybe touch on a couple of framing comments that you've heard or might recall from the past, but I'm mostly going to talk about the previous year, the things that we've done since the last time that we met. And of course, please do interrupt me with questions. You can hot mic given the size of the group, or drop something in the chat box, and I'll be happy to address that. First, I'd like to just talk about two misconceptions of the Smithsonian. And the first refers back to this kind of increasingly hot seat that we all find ourselves in. As it turns out, the Smithsonian is not a federal agency. We're what's called a public-private partnership. And almost 185 years ago, the Smithsonian was actually founded from a gift of $508,000 and a couple of extra dollars from a British philanthropist named James Smithson. He gave this money to the new country, to the United States. It took about 10 years for the US government to decide whether it really wanted to accept money from foreign governments or foreign individuals to support research and education. And once founded, the Smithsonian was charged with increasing the diffusion of knowledge among men. That's a pretty bold challenge. And really it's something that the Smithsonian since has leaned into. The second misperception is, of course, that the Smithsonian is a single building. We are anticipating about 60 million unique visitors to Washington this summer because of America 250 and the semi-cinquentennial. And of course, what they're all going to find is that there are numerous things that are happening. There are 22 museums, there's the National Zoo, there are research centers, in addition to all of the A250 activities that will be happening. But it's this role as a national, even a globally recognized institution around education and research that really, I think, offers a unique potential partner for the work that you're doing in your classroom. One of the things that, as an educator myself, I find to be the most valuable in what I share when I'm working with teachers of all levels is that the resources we have, the materials, the professional development, it all reflects the top minds, scholars, scientists on the entire planet. And the work that we do is in collaboration with those museum experts, those researchers, those field work folks, and all of the resources we have are of the highest quality and free to the American public. As I've tried to understand in my own work why the Smithsonian has such monumental place in our American story, I think it can be broken down to two things that I'm going to use to introduce some of the projects that we're doing with school districts around the state, around the country. One of them is our collection. So we actually have 157 million objects in our collection, but less than 1% are actually on display for the public. Many of these objects are modest. They're the kinds of objects that you might step past if they were lying, in your garage, or if you're cleaning up your grandparents' house, cleaning out your mom's attic. You would find objects like this one, small, modest pieces of wood, no real visible witness marks necessarily. And it's not until you really have the context that this was Thomas Jefferson's writing desk that he carried with him until his death in 1826 that suddenly, this pile of wood becomes something much different. It becomes animated. It becomes alchemized into the spirit of America, the place in which the Declaration of Independence was actually written. And suddenly it has meaning, this object. And while we have many objects in our museums, most of American history is located in your communities. It's located in shoe boxes underneath beds. It's located in memory boxes on the top shelves in a closet. And one of the ways that we support community curation and storytelling is to acknowledge that all the stories of America are not located in Washington. The stories of America are located in everybody's town, no matter how small and no matter how far away. If, by the way, you're interested in the collection pieces that we have that relate to your state, take a quick snapshot of that QR code. We've got a series of state collections that will uh, show you and give you access to all the materials that are somehow relevant to your state, your specific place. And I know that all of you are from different places, so I included this as the state collections from the entire country. You can find your own state in that list. This isn't every single object, but it certainly is the most visible and the most relevant and the most powerful ones. I'll pause for just a second and let you snap that. I think the second thing that I want to emphasize is that in this work, we have worked hard to acknowledge that rural is different everywhere, and the needs of rural communities and rural schools, rural youth are often very different regionally. If you grew up in a very small coastal Virginia town like I did, that's very different than the UP in Michigan. It's very different than Wyoming or Arizona, where Melissa is, or Maine. And it's been important for us to acknowledge that as we work outside of Washington, we also try to understand each community and each area and that we hope to support education in. Because we do want to be the nation's museum and we want to be available to communities, even if you can't come to Washington, even if you don't feel comfortable navigating the city, even if you maybe have some belonging and security in the stories that we tell. And I think my invitation to you today is to imagine ways that the Smithsonian can be available to your schools and your youth and your communities, even if you're far away from Washington or you can't immediately come to our physical and in-place resources. We do this already in many ways. We have a very successful program that for about 31 years has taken traveling exhibits to small towns. It's called Museum on Main Street, affectionately called MOMS. We've actually, though, been working through our education work to connect these traveling exhibits with very clear instructional and pedagogical tools so that students, youth of all ages, can visit and interact with these exhibits when they sit in the public library or a public space in your town or somewhere nearby. So, the Smithsonian has a lot of wonderful educators who largely practice in museum spaces. What we've done in the Rural Initiative is use our teaching background to connect it instructionally to make sure the curriculum and the ways of knowing are mirrored in youth interacting with these exhibits. Right now, we've got 4 that are on the road, including Spark, Places of Innovation, Voices and Votes, Democracy in America, and Americans, which was created with the National Museum of the American Indian. And in all cases, again, the idea is that the community comes and interacts and has deep conversations around their own place in relation to these. But what we're offering now are some really clear guidance on how teachers, maybe it's in a field trip model, maybe it's in a after school extracurricular model, but they can interact with these informal spaces more directly. As a side note, we're developing our newest exhibit that will focus on American music and be ready for launch in 2028. And the Rural Initiative will be working with small towns and rural spaces to place it with the appropriate instructional support. We also have robust online materials that all of your teachers can have access to. These are free, these are open, these are rigorously created. If we get about 30 million unique visitors to the mall every year, we get about 30 million unique visitors to these digital resources. These are speakers, these are webinars, these are instructional materials, these are adult-facing, teacher-facing materials that can be turned into curriculum to match the requirements of their place, of their state, and of their district. And we have teams that can work with them to do so and make sure that we find those relevant connections. And all of this taken together, again, is to really position the Smithsonian as a service in your communities, not as a place for you to travel on vacation or to come during the summertime or to come over a couple of days and then leave because you couldn't quite do it all. I mentioned last time we met that the way that we stood this work up was by conducting a national rural need sensing report. And again, this is an 85-page report that I'm happy to share with any of you. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it today, but I do want to offer a couple of reminders of the data that emerged that really is fueling the work that we've been able to accomplish. The first is that rural Americans all across the country have a very strong positive association with the Smithsonian. And so again, reminding you that we're not a federal agency from Washington. We are a public service mission-driven nonprofit. And what we found from these 4,200 or so community leaders that we worked with and spoke to is that the Smithsonian has a very highly recognized brand. We also came to learn that about 80%, and by the way, anytime you can get 8 out of 10 people right now agreeing, that's to me, that's thumbs up. But about 80% have indicated that they're interested in collaborating with the Smithsonian in their local communities. And all of this work is really intended to connect local rural priorities with experiences and skills and opportunities that don't pull kids away, but rather invest them more deeply in the place they're from and give them the skills that allow them to live a vibrant and career ready path forward. I didn't mention last time because didn't quite happen that we actually conducted this research a second time. We very much wanted to understand that the conclusions that we were drawing from our data were accurate, but we also wanted to acknowledge that the year between research studies was a pretty significant year. It was disruptive at best. This is not a political statement. It's just the world's a very different place a year after the fall of 2024. And so we did all this work a second time, and we were very pleased to see, as represented by the delta in the gray box at the top of each chart, that the interest was still very strong in working with the Smithsonian. In fact, for those people who have a rural background, a rural perspective, but don't necessarily live in a rural zip code, that number rose to nearly 90%, seeing the Smithsonian as a key agent in addressing some of the issues and bringing people in a discourse in a way that maybe we aren't always able to do. And for me, this is where the little d democracy, these are the things that all of you do every day, which is you live in a community and you contribute to that community. You're visible in that community and you figure out how to live, how to get along, how to address the issues that your young people and your families face every single day. And for me, it's that little d that translates to the big D. That's when people get involved in governance and policy and legislation and being aware of the way that things are being managed. And if we can put young people in this pipeline from little d to big D, to me, that's going to be a really powerful way that we might collaborate. And I'd like to offer you just one last glimpse at some data. This is actually from a separate study that I conducted, was a part of a team that conducted at the University of North Carolina before the pandemic. And we were very interested in understanding whether having some notion of your local history, some understanding that you're part of something bigger than yourself could make you a better person. And we conducted this research with all demographics of North Carolinians, all backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, all status, all ages. And what we found was so jarring that we did it a second time because we thought maybe we had messed up the research. And in fact, the numbers maintained a really healthy delta. We expected maybe 3 or 4%. We were hitting triple that, quadruple that, and I'll share that with you now. As a very clear through line in why arts and culture and history, the things the Smithsonian does really well, particularly in education, are important to any rural community, lie in these numbers. If you understand your local history, if you have some sense that you're part of a community, you're expected to contribute, you're visible if you don't, you're 28% more likely to vote. You're 20% more likely to volunteer and play a leadership role. You're 15% more likely to be interested in national affairs and 5 times more likely to run for elected office. If we think about the health of our communities and engaging our young people in civic discourse and civic engagement, you're 25% more likely to pick up trash, donate blood, attend a PTA meeting, go to your kid's parent-teacher conference, volunteer coach a little league team, do service in high school without being drug out to do it because it's required. If you have some sense that you're a part of a community, all of these things statistically improve by a factor of nearly a quarter. To me, that's really powerful evidence for why working in rural communities to tell their stories, to situate and center arts and culture is such an important thing because now kids feel like they belong. And once they feel like they belong, as an educator, I think we could all agree that engagement is really the key. So how have we been doing this over the past year? I'm going to give you some examples now. Again, not to sort of have you pull from a menu of things we might do together, but just to sort of foreshadow the ways that we might collaborate. From that same research, we identified 5 key priorities that rural spaces universally agree are important. And while it's true that every community is different, I found through this work and through this research that there's a lot of universal common ground as well. We're actually very, very similar in many ways. And one of those is that we, as rural communities, want access to educational resources and experiences and access to career readiness opportunities for young people. Young people are our most valuable asset. And what can we do to engage them locally, but also give them all of the skills and the experiences that they need to grow professionally and personally and remain invested? So I'm going to give you some examples of how we did this, and we can brainstorm about specifics if you're interested. Of course, none of this happens despite having a strong reputation by just showing up in small towns. If the Smithsonian just showed up, if I showed up with my Smithsonian pin on, all of you, everybody would be reasonably reluctant or suspicious or cautious about potential partnerships. So coming on in May, a year ago, May of 2025, we identified 18 communities all around the country and invited 2 leaders from those communities to come to Washington for a fully paid, no strings attached summit. And there we introduced them to all of the relevant programs and units and expertise that we have that address the priorities I just shared. Absolutely, educators were a part of this cohort, but we also included elected officials and foundation leaders and business leaders and church leaders. We wanted everybody who understood the fabric of their local space. And then we invited them to identify one of those priorities and return home and start to build a community-based project that we could contribute to and be a part of. And again, I'm not going to go through all of the examples, but here are just a few, and then I want to focus specifically on education. So as an example, we're working currently in Bennington, Vermont with a consortia of school leaders, cultural organization leaders, and the leaders of their National Refugee Relocation Center. Bennington's demographics are changing considerably because of the refugee relocation. And they've created now a 2-year program in which they're uniting the conversation in their community around this notion of resiliency, which includes deep work with their school district. We're working just south of Chattanooga in Cleveland, Tennessee, to bring landowners together with conservation environmentalists to understand best practice in farming so that their business model doesn't suffer while the landscape itself also is supported and maintains its support. We're working in Selma, Alabama to develop a revitalized Water Avenue corridor. Water Avenue is perpendicular to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and working with the schools, working with the cultural organizations, we very much want this to be a place where people don't just drive down from Montgomery and Birmingham and walk the bridge and take a picture as a selfie, but rather they stay because this is now a vibrant area in which the local storytelling led by youth really does bring that health forward. We're working in the Panhandle District region of Texas to tell the unique story of local communities in America 250, or as they say, Texas 500. And most importantly, as we do this work, we bring funders with us so that the programs we develop can find local and regional funding that this part of Texas just traditionally has not taken advantage of. But speaking specifically about education, I'd like to highlight a couple of emerging collaborations. One is in Missoula, Montana, Western Montana, where we've developed a very collaborative set of programs with the Anaconda School District and the Missoula School District, where we're supporting their Head Start program and early childhood literacy at the pre-K, and then college internships at the Smithsonian in the post-secondary. And tying those together then give access to kids in Western Montana to materials that and opportunities they didn't have otherwise. The one that I want to emphasize is this work we do with Head Start, because I suspect this is what you don't associate with the Smithsonian. For about 3 years now, we've had a program called Get a Head Start, in which we've worked with the National Zoo to develop free resources, videos, and other kinds of digital resources, as well as professional development for Head Start professionals. And these materials are intended not just to be for the kids, but to be for the whole families. So as a illustration, in Western Montana, we're actually working now to translate these into Salish language so that the Blackfeet Reservation, the native community, can have access in their native language. This is the kind of material that you don't always associate, but we can make available through the collaborations we have.
Hi, Head Start. I'm at the Smithsonian National Zoo at the farm with my friend Nikki and Betty. Nikki, I have a question.
Sure.
Betty's eyes look kind of different. How come?
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
Just like your eyes, Pinky, in my eyes, we have what we call a circular pupil.
Yeah.
That means the little black part of our eye is round, but you can see Betty here has a different shape, doesn't she?
Yeah, it's like a rectangle.
Exactly, Pinky. So they have a rectangle, and that's really important. That's something we call an adaptation. That's something that goats have that's special to them. So they use that pupil to be able to look down and eat and find the best grass and the whole pasture, but they can also keep looking for predators too. So they can make sure they're staying nice and safe while still.
What I know is that kids love animals. And while they may not be able to come to the National Zoo, this wide suite of resources that have been developed use the animals as a way to encourage early childhood literacy and develop those fundamental skills that is so critical to the success of any young person. On the other end of the spectrum, we're working across the state of North Carolina right now to develop a program in partnership with the Gear Up program at Appalachia State that focuses on aviation as a career pathway. And so we're building different programmatic opportunities for K-12 students to understand that aviation has a lot of different entry points, whether it's drone technology or GIS or air traffic controllers or being a pilot. That first in state, I live in Durham, North Carolina, first in state, first in flight, I should say, is the kind of theme that this partnership has identified as a way to really hook young people on what's possible. That includes understanding that the night sky is one of the landscapes of rural America. We have a program called Smithsonian Stars in which we're identifying rural partners to receive free telescopes with wraparound resources and training so that young people, K-12, elementary through high school, can understand the night sky as yet another landscape, one that reflects and is a wonderful metaphor for that inspiration. I'm working across the state of Kentucky this summer to provide regional events for teachers and districts to better understand all the resources that the Smithsonian offers. More than PD, I think this is intended to develop those local partnerships that are so critical for rolling out and supporting any kind of education work. Right now, we've scheduled these events in Washington County and in Hazard County, but we want to do one on the western part of the state as well. And that includes a real focus on STEM materials. We have a program called Always Think Like a Scientist, Atlas, that really focuses on improving hands-on learning skills, citizen science learning skills for elementary age students who then can translate that literacy into all of the other disciplines, including their own literacy. And just as examples, we're working with several areas to implement the Native Knowledge 360 program that we have. This is developed at the National Museum of American Indian and really does focus on how to bring Indigenous and Native perspectives into the curriculum that we're asked to teach. Several states, if not many states, are now being required to teach some kind of Native perspective in their curriculum, but don't necessarily have the trusted resources. And so now we have this opportunity to address that. And then finally, as an example, we're working in Central Appalachia with Shawnee State University in Portsmouth, Ohio, again, to try to draw a really clear line between pre-K, K-12, and higher ed, post-secondary. That doesn't mean kids go to college necessarily. It means that there's some kind of workforce preparedness that we can support. And one of the most effective ways we've done that is through our Democracy and Dialogue program. I did mention this last year, but I'll share again that this is a really high impact program where we work with 60 communities every semester. We offer stipends to the teacher who oversees the local work, and we ask groups of kids to investigate the local stories of their communities. Currently, we're focused on America 250, but starting in January of 2027, we'll start to have different kinds of themes, perhaps a theme like innovation. What is the story of innovation in your community? So underneath the actual work that kids do, again, is that sense of local pride, and community engagement that leads to a healthy community. Most importantly, what we do is match each community with one in another part of the country, and kids then share and learn from each other. And I can't tell you how many students are shocked to learn that they have a lot in common and maybe they have some differences. I'm reminded of our students in Detroit, Michigan, where I happen to be right now, who were partnered with students in Columbus Falls High School in Montana, and were shocked that those kids brought their cattle to school every morning and found that to be an endearing difference. So these are the kind of community-based work that we do, but we also have several national programs that I can also offer. These are programs that we have funding for, and my office then seeks rural partners to implement them. For example, we have a very strong relationship and developed curriculum with the Boys and Girls Club. We also do with the 4-H clubs, and I know many of your schools and communities have wonderful 4-H programs, but we offer civic engagement programming so that young people can do that local storytelling. One program that we just stood up about a month ago is a new internship program funded by the First Interstate Bank System. They've identified funding, multi-year funding, to allow us to invite a student from a rural space in in each of their 10 footprint states. They're listed on the screen. And those students now receive a fully paid and compensated 10-week experience at the Smithsonian in the summer. And then they return home to apply those learnings and that transformative experience to their local environment. This is something that I feel very strongly about in terms of expanding that imagination of young people to what's possible, and to do so in a way that grounds them, remains them rooted in the place that they find so powerful. So again, I could give you lots of other examples of communities in which this is happening, but I think the invitation here is to imagine that we might be able to create something new together, that there are off-the-shelf, shovel-ready programs that we could offer your schools and your educators, but there's also the opportunity to do something new potentially. And maybe that's what brings us back to my original point, which is that it does come down to objects and place. It comes down to the meaning in the communities that we have. It comes down to engaging young people in those stories so they have civic pride and so that they can be a part of the future of all the places that you represent. So in conclusion, I'll offer really 3 entry points to potential collaboration. These are not competitive, these are not sequential, these are just 3 places where, given your capacity and your interest and kind of what's happening already in your local communities, could be of interest. The first and at the top is to participate in the programs that I've mentioned. We've got existing programs that we could easily offer to you. We could save spaces for you. We can make them available to your teachers. These are ways for you to just take advantage of having the Smithsonian there. From my point of view, that's a way to earn trust. That's a way for us to show up and be available and be visible in your communities and classrooms. Secondly, and in the middle, is to invite us to be a part of things that you already have happening. For example, from the work in the Panhandle, we'll be working with one school district outside of Lubbock who buried a time capsule 50 years ago in 1976. And they're going to dig it up this summer and then place a new one. And the Smithsonian will be there. And by being there, it just raises the visibility of that school and those kids and that work. And so sometimes just inviting us to be a part of existing PD days or things that are happening in your community that you want to celebrate or acknowledge is very powerful. And then lastly, again, at the bottom is to co-design something new. This takes a little longer. Sometimes it requires funding that we raise together, but this is a chance then to really design something unique to your place. And so I do want to save time for questions. I want to be mindful of our time, but I want to share one last opportunity, and then I'll stop sharing my screen and we can chat for a bit. And that is the Smithsonian's National Education Summit that happens every July.
Dr. Monique Chisholm, Undersecretary for Education at the Smithsonian. And I want to invite you to one of the most dynamic experiences for professional learning this summer, the Smithsonian National Education Summit. This year, we're celebrating the nation's semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 14th, 15th, and 16th, in the heart of Washington, D.C., and also online around the globe, completely free for all attendees. This year's theme, Together We Thrive Towards a More Perfect Union, calls us to explore the stories that shaped our nation and the possibilities that lie ahead. Over 3 days, we'll spark curiosity, deepen understanding, and send you home with practical strategies and fresh inspiration for your learners. If you join us in person, you'll also have access to exclusive hands-on workshops and behind-the-scenes tours. Come be part of inspiring keynotes, dynamic sessions, and shared commitment to empowering the next generation. The Smithsonian National Education Summit, free to attend, made for educators just like you. Welcome to your Smithsonian.
So I will drop a link in the chat box in just a moment where you can sign up for the summit or share it with your teachers. Again, that first day, that Tuesday, is completely online and completely free, so you get resources and PD. The middle day, if you're close enough to DC, is in person with hands-on in-person workshops. And then the third day is behind the scenes work in our museums.
This is so exciting, Andy.
I'm going to conclude there and offer one last QR code, and this is an interest form. If anything I've shared is interesting to you or intriguing, you'd like some more information that you can share with your schools and classrooms and educators and staff, please do complete that. There's no commitment. There's no there's nothing that you're signing up for other than more information. Please also know that this is also not urgent. In other words, if this sounds great to you, but you need some time or capacity, or there are things going on and you want to touch base later, that's completely fine. We're here to serve. We're here to be a part of finding solutions and addressing your priorities in education in all of your communities. So I'm going to pause there and open this up to conversation. Valerie, I'll let you take the lead in facilitating that. And again, I want to thank you for allowing me to share this with you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to invite Todd Dugan and Melissa Sadorf to kick us off in a discussion. This is very exciting and enlightening, Andy. Melissa and Todd.
Yeah, I think I'll start with seeing if anyone has questions, because I know I have a few, but I want to make sure that I open it up to any of you that might as well. So feel free to unmute.
Melissa, I've got a question.
Do it.
I know you, Kim. I've met you before. Talked to you at least.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I thought good to see you again.
Yeah.
I've got a question. Would you be the one we'd reach out to? There were 2 executive orders, and one was around AI delivered content.
Yeah.
Through school-wide 4-H that became part of the big bill, and we're working on a response to that with USDA. And Valerie's on our board of our nonprofit, Collegiate Education, and Rachel McLean, who is our former president and is now on our board. We're working on an AI-ready place-based learning project to use the National Ranch Heritage Center in Lubbock as grade 3 through 5 research basis, to use the official Watts Museum for grade 6 through 8. She's now the national director of that. And then we were wanting to talk about using the Smithsonian for grades 9 through 12 to align CTE programs of study and student-directed research and CTE career pathways. Yeah. And it's part of a USDA, AFRI, and NIFA grants, and then a National Science Foundation grant. Would you be available to do a Zoom with us to get, she's the devil's in the detail.
It is.
And she's can get a lot more detail, or who would we need to talk to?
Yeah, please do reach out to me. As it turns out, I saw Rachel at that event in Amarillo just a few weeks ago, and the WASP Museum is actually going to be a part of the Democracy and Dialogue program this coming fall. So she and I have been collaborating and having conversations, and I would love to set up some time for the 3 of us to talk about this specifically. Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. Enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely, Kim. Thank you. Any other questions from the group? Andy, I know that we've got the semi-cinquentennial happening, all kinds of stuff. Is there any one place that people can go to get a listing of all of the different events that the Smithsonian is having, or the different initiatives that they've got going on?
Yeah, I think it's almost like you're a podcast interviewer. You just know exactly how to tee things up, don't you? Yes, I'm going to drop a link in the chat box. And Adina, thank you so much for dropping links as I was speaking about the variety of things. We have so much going on both in Washington and around the country. I think the Smithsonian started planning for 2026 starting in 1977, it feels like. I mean, this has just been on everybody's mind for so long. There are numerous things happening in Washington, numerous exhibits and things that are available and open now to the public that have never been open and available before and will never be again, or at least not for another 50 years. And I dropped a link in there that will take you to many of those. That will also list the online materials and events that any of you could sign up for. Of course, summertime is not always a time to convene kids around this, but it is a place where you can gain these resources, gain knowledge, prepare for the coming year. Because the way we handle America 250 is that it's just the beginning. That once the fireworks have burned away, that we still have a lot of work to do around the civil discourse in America.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions? Because I don't want to hog the airtime.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. So first of all, this was very, very informative and appreciative.
Thank you.
As a small rural K-12 superintendent, at least in our area, budgets continue to constrict each year. These free resources are going to be extremely valuable.
Yeah.
And similar to Melissa, do you have a link because I was frantically writing things down about the Education Summit and then the Illinois, well, it wasn't Illinois, I looked at Illinois, but the ones by the states and the ones regarding the 250th. Is there a single slideshow slash PDF that a rural K-12 superintendent could share with faculty district wide and then encourage them to look through all the offerings available?
Well, I'll start by
Because
saying,
you have so much
yeah.
on here.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that I'm more than happy to share my own deck or put something together for you. Using Kentucky as an example, what I've now been doing is working with superintendents and leaders like yourself to identify exactly what they're interested in, where their gaps are and where their needs are, and then tailor making live in-person PD and or online kinds of materials that we can share with them around that. And as you can imagine, in some cases it's America 250. In other cases, it's STEM or early childhood literacy, whatever it may be. I would say though that if you want a single link, I just dropped Learning Lab into the chat box. This is the best place to go or send your teachers so that they can begin to curate and create their own instructional collections.
Perfect. This is really valuable. Thank you.
Of course.
Andy, one of the things that the Smithsonian excels at is setting up some pretty successful partnerships with rural places and people. Can you talk a little bit about what the conditions that need to be in place locally, really things that need to be considered so that the work takes hold and really does last beyond that initial rollout or, the initial excitement of something happening?
Sure. And, in some ways, I think you've identified the number one goal / challenge of this kind of work as I represent the Smithsonian, and that is to show up and to earn the trust and not to show up just once because, everybody loves the first visit. It's, will you come back?
Yeah.
It's what's going to happen once this is done. So really trying to develop ways to develop deep and long lasting work. So again, using examples from these places that we're currently working in Selma and in Missoula, we've got a menu, a list of probably 5 or 6 different ways that we're immediately working because we have the funding to provide it at no charge to the locality. Mm. And now the Smithsonian as a brand, as a logo, as people are visible in the communities, visible to families, visible to teachers, visible to business leaders for a year, for 2 years, for longer even. And so when you have 4-H working with Democracy and Dialogue next to the work we do with public libraries, alongside an intern from that, suddenly there's like a body of work that's happening. But having said that, it all depends on the capacity of the local partner and what the interests are and the priorities that you've identified. So we very rarely come in to say, here's what we want to do. It's always tell us what you need, tell us what the priorities are, and what can we do to match that. The good thing about the Smithsonian is that we have resources and expertise really A to Z, Asian art to the zoo. And there's almost nothing that we can't sort of leverage that expertise to address.
What does success look like from your perspective when you're working with a community on whatever initiative they have going on? I mean, is it student engagement? Is it teacher learning? Is it stronger community relationships? Something else?
Yeah, this is not the kind of answer that I'm going to put in any kind of reporting that I'll give to our donors, or this is not maybe even a measurable metric that, but I bet we're all familiar with engagement. We want communities to be engaged in the places that they live, the people that they're with in community. We want young people to be engaged in their communities, in their school experience. We want teachers to be engaged outside of the bubble that they're teaching in, with networks outside of that space. We want to work with partners like NREA, to be honest, just such a fantastically valuable resource to rural educators. And for us to then be sitting side by side is a valuable thing. So success is engagement, because that's where the real impact happens.
Yeah, well said.
Andy, real quick, Dave Lund, I'm in Illinois. Actually, Todd and I are right up the street from each other, so it's fun to see him on this call. So, hey, the big thing about being a small district and being a rural district, many times I don't know what I don't know, and I'm overwhelmed with the amount of resources. Is the best thing for me, like again, I want to celebrate United States for our district to have that theme. That interest form, I'm guessing, is probably the best way to go, because again, I don't know what I don't know.
Yep.
I know my teachers would love to host something, to do something in our community. So start there. Is that kind of your recommendation?
It is for several reasons. The first is that, David, you got a lot going on, and so as soon as you can connect me with others on your staff, the highly skilled professionals that you work with who can absorb some of that responsibility from you, then that's a great introduction.
Okay, excellent.
I'm curious, David, how far are you from Macomb?
We're south Macomb, probably about 2.5 hours.
Okay, so not super far. So I asked because one of the communities from our rural leadership cohort are based in Western Illinois, and so what I will do with your forum, and then to get to know each of you a little more personally, is to see the other things we have going on around you, because the more we can do things kind of in capacity, the better. And it could be that our good friends in Illinois, in Western Illinois, help structure something where we're giving professional development for your teachers in a way that doesn't seem possible right now.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the information.
Any others?
Nice to see you, David. Thanks for joining today.